Hi everyone, this is Svava Brooks. I am so happy that you're joining us here today for another interview on the Journey to the Heart interview series, where we are discussing, I'm talking to amazing experts, professionals that share their passion and unique approach to thriving. I'm especially excited today to have with us Kristin Neff. Welcome, Kristin.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, such a pleasure. I attended your workshop a few weeks ago that was really amazing. So I really wanted to make a point to connect with you and get your message out to more people. But before we go into our questions, I just want to tell our audience just a little bit about you.
Okay.
So Kristin Neff is currently an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. She is a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research, conducting the first empirical study on self-compassion over a decade ago. That alone sounds amazing. That's been a decade, right? In addition to that, writing numerous academic articles and book chapters on the topic, and she's the author of the book Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, and the 6-CD audio set called Self-Compassion Step by Step, released by Sounds True. I know you've done some awesome, great work with Dr. Chris Germer, which I attended a few weeks back, where you have developed empirically supported 8-week training course called Mindful Self-Compassion. So I'm very excited to have you here today to tell our audience more about self-compassion and why it's such an important piece to healing and overcoming challenges in life.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the core components if we just jump right into it?
Yeah, so it's often good to start with the definition of what I mean by self-compassion, because oftentimes people hear the word self-compassion and they think self-pity or things which were actually quite different. So self-compassion is really treating yourself with the same type of compassion, care, and concern you showed a friend you cared about when your friend was suffering in some way, whether your friend had just made a mistake or had some failure or was just struggling with some issue in their life. The idea is you treat yourself with the same kindness, really, care, compassion. Your heart goes out to yourself the way it would go out to a friend who is in need. So certainly kindness is at the center of self-compassion, being kind as opposed to self-critical. Actually, one of the things I do, and you experience in the workshop, is I ask people to think about when they have a good friend who's hurting in some ways, failed in some way, feeling bad about themselves, how do you treat them? What do you say? What do you do? And then what about yourself? When you fail, you're feeling bad or you're struggling, how do you treat yourself? And typically people find that they're incredibly hard on themselves, cruel even. Often if people really start looking, they're harder and cruel and say meaner things to themselves than to anyone else in their life. So often we're really our own worst enemy. So with self-compassion, we turn that around. We let go of that harsh self-criticism and that kind of mean stance toward ourselves, and we cultivate a warm, kind, friendly, supportive approach toward ourselves. But it's more than just self-kindness. Another very important feature of self-compassion. So compassion, the word compassion means to suffer with. There's a sense of connectedness in compassion. And so when we turn that toward ourselves, that means we're connected to others in our experience of hardship and suffering. And I call this common humanity, right? So remembering the imperfection, failure, struggle, hardship, this is the shared human experience. Yes. And although this is something most of us will acknowledge logically, what happens illogically, emotionally, when we fail, when we make a mistake, or something really difficult happens, is we think this should not be happening. Like something has gone wrong. Normal is supposed to be everything's perfect, and when I blow it, or I get that diagnosis, or whatever happens, something has gone wrong. And that feeling of abnormality, this unconscious assumption of abnormality, is incredibly isolating. So when we're struggling, we feel like we're the only ones who are struggling. So self-compassion, this connectedness component, what it does is it reminds us that actually this is normal. This is part of the human experience. This is something that we all go through. And when we can embrace this fact that this is a shared aspect of the human experience, who actually feel more connected to others as opposed to isolated. And then the last component, which is also very important to kind of keep our self-compassion real, you might say, is mindfulness, right? A lot of talk about mindfulness today in psychology, but so just very briefly, mindfulness refers to the ability to be with things as they are. Even situations we want to run away from, we want to fight, we don't like it at all, I don't like this emotion, I don't like this feeling. We have the strength to turn toward it, to face it, to be with it. And to kind of see it as it is, as opposed to either ignoring it or avoiding it, or as opposed to running away with an exaggerated storyline like, oh my God, this is the end of the world, it's horrible, I've gained 3 pounds. I mean, that's maybe not a good example, but you know what I mean. So, and this is what keeps self-compassion, makes it different than self-pity, because it's not woe is me, a dramatic storyline of how things are for me. Kind of like life is difficult. So when all 3 components are there, I call that self-compassion. Yeah,
I like that. And can you, speak then to a little bit, the benefits, of course, but often, we resist the very thing we need the most, which is that the compassion and kindness. Can you explain? I really loved how you guys explained almost the biology behind it.
Yeah, so well, there's a few reasons we resist self-compassion. So before I get into the biology, I just want to mention that these misconceptions about self-compassion that people have, very strong, often culturally given perceptions, like if I'm kind to myself, I won't be motivated, or self-indulgent, or I'll be selfish, or, again, I'll just wallow in self-pity. All those research shows now that these are misconceptions, that we know that you will be more motivated if you're a good supportive friend to yourself than like tearing yourself down, that you're actually going to take better care of yourself if you care as opposed to just, cutting yourself down all the time. So we have a lot of beliefs, fears about what self-compassion is that get in the way of treating ourselves in this kind way. And so that's kind of more at the level of belief. But, sometimes people say, well, Kristin, why is it so much easier to be compassionate to others than it is to myself? And that's because actually self-criticism, kind of the opposite of self-compassion, is rooted in the body's threat defense system. This is the oldest part of our nervous system. They often call it the reptilian brain, something we share with almost all other organisms. When there's a threat perceived in the environment, our amygdala gets triggered, we release cortisol and adrenaline, and we get ready for fight or flight. And so if you fail, I might say, oh, but if I fail, I'm scared. I feel threatened, right? Yes. So when we fail or we feel inadequate, we actually feel threatened in a way that we don't experience for other people. Now, of course, the system is designed for threats to our bodily self. But in modern times, threats to our self-concept trigger the system just as powerfully. So if I fail, my body reacts as if I'm being chased by a lion, basically. Fight or flight mode, unfortunately, we fight the problem, and the problem is us. So we attack ourselves, thinking that somehow that's going to fix the problem. If I just, you should have done this. You were so lazy. I'm ashamed of you. As if somehow that kind of real aggressiveness is going to help you out and get rid of the fear and make you be safe by, somehow being perfect. So it's a really natural reaction. We shouldn't judge it. It's, I think, built into our physiology. But, it's not very productive, because we know that when you're an inner enemy as opposed to an inner ally, it just makes things worse. Luckily, we do have another system, a system that comes online much more easily with our friends, and that's the mammalian caregiving system, right? So all mammals, the advance of mammals over reptiles is we're born very immature. Human infants are by far the most immature. It's a long period of where the infant's basically helpless, but they have a long time for their brain to grow and adapt successfully to the environment. So we have a system called the attachment system, the mammalian caregiving system, that's designed to make the infant want to be safe next to the mother, basically, and the mother want to take care of and care for the infant. And that system is basically triggered by things like warmth, gentle touch, and soothing vocalizations. So this, compassion is also part of our biology. It's just not triggered as easily as the threat defense system. That's the number one that comes online.
Yes.
And you have to step back and then allow kind of the other system to take place.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I loved in the course of the 2 days with you how you simplified it. And it was kind of an aha moment for me. I mean, I was already putting my hand on my heart. I could feel like that was definitely something that I've been evolving and doing to help myself on my own healing journey and teaching others. So it was a fantastic validation when you and Chris were teaching that all weekend long. But still, I find, the resistance to it, but also, I know I'm doing it because I'm going to, override the fight or flight, but instead tap into the other system that's already in there that I can use to help myself. So
the other safety system.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, your program, you're working with people with trauma histories, and it is a little more difficult with people with trauma histories, depending on your background, but often, unfortunately, especially if it's early childhood trauma, is the system, the soothing touch, being cared for by the caregiver that's supposed to make you feel safe and cared for and supportive, sometimes actually gets mixed in with not being so safe and cared for and supported, right? So there can actually be fear there. In fact, sometimes when people, especially with a trauma history, you do something like put your hands on your heart, that system gets triggered, and instead of feeling safe and calmed and soothed, you actually feel really frightened. And there's a term for that that we use, which is called backdraft. Backdraft is basically a term for the resistance we feel and sometimes the fear we feel when we give ourselves compassion. And the reason we use the term backdraft is a firefighting term which describes when a firefighter goes to a house and it's on fire, and if you open the doors of the house, the fresh air rushes in and the flames rush out. Right, it's a natural phenomenon, but you have to be careful around backdraft. Again, it's, the people think the problem is either I can't do the self-compassion thing, or it makes me feel horrible and I give myself compassion. I just feel grief or fear or anger or whatever it is. The problem isn't the self-compassion. The problem is the pain that's been stored in behind these closed doors of our heart for sometimes our whole lives.
Yes.
So when we open the doors of our heart, we need to expect that some pain will come out. This is part of the healing process. It's natural, it's normal, but that especially if you do have a trauma background, it's very important to go slowly, to let yourself be a slow learner, to maybe crack open the door of your heart and then, okay, time to close, just be really gentle and kind and supportive to yourself as you go through the process of learning a new way to relate to yourself. Being kind to your old system of threat defense and criticism or shutting down whatever it is that got you through, really respecting that as a way to try to keep yourself safe. We don't want to just like swirl out one system and radically change. We want to go slow. We want to develop capacity. But it can be done, and there's a lot of the research basically shows that people with trauma histories, they do struggle more with self-compassion because, again, the system that should have made it easy got interfered with, usually when people are young. The good news is this research shows that people with trauma histories, especially with the help of a therapist or maybe a supportive partner who learn to develop self-compassion, you actually can kind of reparent yourself with compassion. You can give yourself the kind supportive nurturance you need that maybe you didn't get from someone else, but there's a very powerful coping mechanism for helping to heal the wounds of the past. So it's like with the mindset of knowing, okay, this is going to maybe be hard. There will be backdraft. It's normal. It's okay. I've got to go slowly. Persist is one of the most powerful ways we can actually undo those patterns and start building more productive habits. Yeah. So
beautiful. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And you mentioned, what you found in your studies, and I mean, obviously, what are some of the benefits in going slow, but over time, I think you've shared in your studies that there's definitely long-term benefits.
Oh yeah, no, I mean for everyone. I've never found a single person who doesn't benefit from self-compassion. So it's linked to fewer negative mind states like depression, anxiety, stress, shame, right? It's also linked to many positive mind states, things like happiness and life satisfaction. And one of the things that happen with self-compassion, I kind of like a visual metaphor for it. It's embracing our suffering really, with kind of this sense of loving, connected presence. That's another term I use sometimes for the three components of kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Loving, connected presence is a very positive emotion. So when we embrace our pain, when we hold ourselves in the midst of our pain with loving, connected presence, we help soothe and calm the pain. We help heal the pain. We help be less depressed, be less anguished. We feel anxious, we feel calmer, we feel it's a very good antidote to shame, because it's like that you're kind of applying this balm to reduce the shame, but you're also generating this wonderful connected emotion of, kindness and connectedness and mindfulness. So it's very powerful for reducing negative states of mind at the same time that it generates positive states of mind. And then all sorts of areas, it's definitely linked to better motivation, more sustainable motivation. It's linked to better relationship health. It's linked to a better eating patterns, better body image. At this point, pretty much you name it. Yes. It was good. It seems like self-compassion helps.
Exactly.
It's not going to math scores. Sorry, if you're bad at math, you may just be stuck with that one.
Yeah.
Other than that, it seems to really help. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think you covered it all, and I really appreciate it. I know we have limited time here today, but I mean, we want to send people to learn more about you and to get your book. And I just discovered on your website there's a lot more resources there now than were just a while back when I looked. So can you tell people what they can find?
Redesign. So there's meditations and exercises. You can test your own self-compassion level. There's, if you're interested in research, there's a ton of research on there. So
yes,
yeah,
there were all kinds of categories of both the mindfulness, the self-compassion piece, obviously, and some guided meditations, some audios that you do a beautiful job, and I enjoyed those when I was in your training. So I don't want to keep you much longer, but if there's any last insight that you can give our audience about really leaning into and looking for some resources and maybe even a therapist to guide them to start.
Yeah, I mean, so if I was looking for a therapist, I would look for someone who really understands self-compassion, who practices self-compassion in their own life, and really understands this, really honoring this going slowly. I can't tell you, for so many people it's radical. I say, people come to my workshops and I say, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I want you to sit this exercise out, because that's ultimately taking care of yourself. So always asking yourself, what do you need? Can I give it to myself? And really being very kind and gentle and patient in the process of learning how to be self-compassionate, and it will change your life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. Well, I really, really wanted to thank you for all the important work that you're doing, and it's certainly impacted me and my healing journey, and I share your work with all my clients and anybody who will listen. So thank you so much. I know our audience will come over and check out your book and all your resources. Like I said, there's so much there, and it's all for free. So you have a generous heart, Kristin.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for doing this podcast. It's so important to get this out there in the world. So
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Happy to do it. Bye-bye now.